Welcome back to Brilliant Fools. My name is Adam Green, and for this mindset moment, I wanted to take a look at generations and really this entire week kind of explore this concept of generations and the differences in generations, especially as it comes to the workforce, when they're going into business or businesses and work ethic, etc., different things that come up. But to set the mindset correctly, or set the mindset, sure, we'll go with that. But to set our minds correctly, I want to go back to Scripture and sort of see what Scripture says about generations, about youth, about old age, etc., etc. Because I think it's going to set the correct tone for how we look at this. There's a lot of things out there that are going around and talking about whether it's Gen Z, Generation X versus your boomers and your millennials, and et cetera, et cetera. But I don't think they tell the whole picture. And I think there's something that we're missing just from things that I've seen over the years, over time, my own experiences, but we'll get into that as we go. For now, let's put this in perspective by looking at some things in Scripture when it comes to generations. Something like Psalm 154 verse 4, one generation shall commend your works to another and shall declare your mighty acts. Psalm 71:18, even to old age and gray hairs, O God, do not forsake me until I proclaim your might to another generation and your power to all those to come. So there's a concept of making sure that we tell those who are coming along behind us and after us what great things God has done for us. And we continue that tradition so that people can use it and have something concrete to fall back on and say, well, it worked for this guy, so what in my life is God doing? And they tell the next generation, and it just continues on. There's this continuation from one generation to another. Not divided, not upset about this generation or that one, or old people don't understand, young people don't work right, etc., etc. It's, no, I'm going to proclaim your mighty works, God, to the next generation. And then you look at some scriptures about getting older. Proverbs 16:31, gray hair is a crown of glory. It is gained in a righteous life. So there's this concept of gray hair being a good thing. And it's not necessary for us to fight it and constantly try to just stay young. But it's okay. Let's understand it's a crown of glory. It's gained by a righteous life. It's gained by doing things at least good enough to live that old. So there's something about it that is good. However, look at something like Deuteronomy 34:7. Moses was 120 years old when he died. His eye was undimmed and his vigor unabated. Whoa. I mean, that's holy crow, you know? That's crazy. He was 120 years old and he was still strong. He was still vibrant. He was still going strong. So there is something to that, that you can be young and fit even while you get old, and you can still continue on and continue doing well. But then we look at, well, let's look at Isaiah 46:4 first. Even to your old age, I am he, God says, and to gray hairs, I will carry you. I have made and I will bear, I will carry and will save. So God will carry us even as we do age. But then Proverbs 20:29, the glory of young men is their strength, but the splendor of old men is their gray hair. So there's that concept as well. There's a book called From Strength to Strength. And it talks about these two types of strength. So it talks about the strength when you're younger that you have, and then what are your strengths when you get older, about this glory in the gray hair. I think there are some things that it gets wrong, and I'll address that in a different episode. But right now, to set the mind, just understand what Scripture says about this. And so we know about the older generations with their gray hair. being a glory to them, and there's wisdom in it, and there's righteousness. You've lived the correct way, or the way you ought to live, to be able to make it that long, right? Which is good. But what about the youth? There's a classic passage, 1 Timothy 4:12, that says, "Let no one despise you for your youth, but set an example to the believers in speech and conduct, in faith, love, in faith, and purity." So there's that aspect of it. Let no one despise you, but set an example. Be an example. Ecclesiastes 11:9, "Rejoice, O young man, in your youth, and let your heart cheer you in the days of your youth." So you've got youth, enjoy it. Use it while you have it. Ecclesiastes 12:1, "Remember also your Creator in the days of your youth, before the bad days come and the years draw near, of which you will say, I have no pleasure in them." So there is this aspect that, especially in this wisdom literature, where it's more observing life than anything else, as we get older, we tend to not enjoy as much as when we were young. But then 2 Timothy 2:22 is another one I wanted to look at, where it says, "Flee youthful passions and pursue righteousness, faith, love, and peace, along with those who call on the Lord from a pure heart." Yes, it is very true that youthful passions do affect the youth. There's no doubt about that. But it's not limited to youth. The older we get, we can still have youthful passions. And it can be youthful passions that are less controlled when we're young, maybe more controlled when we're older, but we still have them and they still come up. And that could be anything from lust to anger to gossip to there's any number of things that we can have. But it says flee those passions and pursue righteousness. I was talking this morning with my two older boys about the way that metal is hardened and strengthened in some ways when it's hardened, but I think it's called annealing if I'm not mistaken. But they heat it up to a certain amount, a lot of times in an oven, maybe in a fire, but they heat it up to a certain temperature and then you quench it, you cool it down, maybe in oil and water, but then you may repeat that process. And you can make it very, very hard. And especially for certain knives and things, this is a good thing. It can be a very good thing to make a hard metal. But the harder you make it, the more brittle it is. It's kind of ironic. It's not quite as strong in some ways, the harder it is. Now, we don't have to be old to get hard and set in our ways. Look, my boys can get very stubborn and very inflexible, very brittle. And I can see it in them. I can see when they do get hit with something that's out of what they want to be happening. It's very difficult to deal with. And that's something they'll have to gain maturity in over time. But it's not limited to them. It's the same thing as we age. And if we get more and more set in our ways and less flexible, we can break easily as well. When things that we see those younger generations coming along, pulling in that are different than what we're used to, that are changing, not necessarily in principle, like underlying principle, especially spiritual principle, but just in application and the way that things are done. And if I'm super inflexible, I can get really easily offended by that. And that's me breaking at that point. So I hope I don't get that way. I hope the gray hairs that I do have end up being an indication of wisdom and righteousness, and not I've been so hard that, yeah, I've lived a long time, but I'm super inflexible and I break easily. At any rate, there are some times that being a little inflexible is good, but I think most times we need to be pliable. We need to be able to be adjusted to what God is doing with us and in us. And you look at the life of Moses. Yeah, I mean, there were times he was stubborn for sure, but the overwhelming majority of his life, he was flexible. He was pliable. He was used by God and used very well by God in some really neat ways that God sustained him for all of his life, 120 years. And he's not the only one. You look at Caleb, Joshua and Caleb, they were contemporaries of Moses. But when they were going into the promised land, finally, Caleb said, look, I'm 80 years old now, and I'm just as strong as I was when I was 40. So let me fight for you to get Israel into the promised land, and then I want this land that's out here. And God did that for him as well. So we can, especially as we yield to the Lord, yield to his ways and follow him, we can be flexible, we can be stronger, we can be longer lasting. And I hope that happens for all of us. We'll explore a little more about generations, what the world is saying about generations now, how the differences are, and then how that kind of fits into what Scripture says as well throughout the rest of this week. So I hope you'll join me for that. And until next time, thanks.